In the heart of a bustling art district, nestled among gleaming glass buildings and neon-lit galleries, there stood a prestigious yet rather unassuming space, Vanguard Gallery. Its pristine white walls showcased the work of some of the most influential artists in the world, and its reputation was unrivaled. It was a place where dreams were made or shattered, and every exhibit was a step towards immortality or irrelevance. Charles Westbrook, the gallery owner and curator, had made a name for himself as a discerning critic with an eye for only the finest art. His reputation for spotting talent was legendary, and he had cultivated an air of elitism that matched the exclusivity of his gallery. To Charles, art was more than just a collection of colors and shapes on canvas. It was about pedigree, lineage, and sophistication. He prided himself on his ability to separate the worthy from the pretenders, and his word was final. One cold autumn afternoon, as the gallery hummed with the quiet murmur of patrons and collectors, Charles was preparing for a private viewing of a new artist's work. The gallery had received a portfolio from a young black artist named Marcus Jenkins. Marcus had submitted his paintings with a simple letter, and the owner, in his usual detached manner, had glanced at the files with mild curiosity. The name didn't ring any bells, but the invitation had been personal. The fact that Marcus was from a modest background and hadn't been shown in any major galleries had made Charles chuckle inwardly. He's probably one of those starving artist types, Charles thought, flipping through the digital photos of the paintings. They were raw, bold, and vibrant, with thick brushstrokes and an almost primal energy to them. But to Charles, there was a lack of refinement, a certain lack of sophistication that he so valued. The colors were too loud. The themes too aggressive. This was not art that belonged in his gallery. Marcus Jenkins arrived at the Vanguard Gallery for the meeting, dressed in a slightly worn leather jacket and faded jeans, his sneakers tapping against the polished floor as he walked into the minimalist white space. His artwork, displayed in a small corner of the gallery, looked like it belonged to an entirely different world, one full of energy, movement, and passion. Charles gave him a cursory glance and extended a hand, offering a tight smile. "You must be Marcus," he said, his voice clipped and formal. "I've gone through your portfolio, and I have to say, I'm intrigued by your approach." Marcus smiled nervously, adjusting the strap of his messenger bag. He could feel the weight of Charles's gaze, the underlying judgment, even if it was hidden behind pleasantries. But he was determined to make his mark in the art world, and Vanguard Gallery seemed like the perfect place to do so. "I appreciate you taking the time to look at my work," Marcus replied, his voice steady but betraying the hint of nerves. "I believe my paintings tell a story. They're reflections of my experiences, the struggles and beauty of the world I see." Charles arched an eyebrow, glancing at the pieces hanging on the wall. "I see," he muttered, clearly unimpressed. "Your paintings are very visceral, shall we say. A bit too raw, though. Have you considered refining your technique? Perhaps adding some subtlety, nuance? Art is about more than just capturing emotion, it's about technique, detail." Marcus bit his lip, feeling the sting of the critique. But he wasn't ready to back down. "I'm not trying to be subtle," he said, his voice rising a little. "I want people to feel what I'm feeling, to see the world as I see it." Charles's lips curled into a polite but condescending smile. Well, there's a place for that, of course, but you must understand, not everyone will get it. Art isn't just about emotions, it's about precision. People want to invest in something that holds value. Your work, it's not there yet." The words cut deeper than Marcus expected. "What do you mean by not there yet?" he asked, his heart pounding in his chest. "Oh, I mean that your work is, how should I put it, passionate, certainly, but it lacks sophistication. It's a bit too raw, too untamed. No one will pay $1 million for something that looks like it came from a child's crayon box," Charles said, chuckling lightly to himself, seemingly oblivious to the impact of his words. Marcus froze. The gallery owner's dismissive tone made his stomach churn. He had been told his art would be valued one day, that it would make a difference, but here was a man who seemed to be telling him that it would never be worth anything. It wasn't just the critique of his work that stung, It was the subtle dismissal of who he was as an artist. Charles didn't see Marcus as a visionary, he saw him as a joke. Trying to maintain his composure, Marcus forced a smile. "I appreciate your feedback, but I know there's value in what I'm doing," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll find a place for it." Charles raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment further. "Of course. Best of luck with your career, Mr. Jenkins. Perhaps you should consider a different direction. There are many galleries out there that cater to your type of work, but here at Vanguard, we're looking for something with a bit more gravitas." Marcus stood there for a moment, his mind racing. This was his dream, but it felt like it was being torn apart in front of him. He had no intention of giving up, but the sting of the rejection was almost unbearable. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the gallery, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. The cold evening air bit at Marcus's skin as he stepped out of Vanguard Gallery, still reeling from the sharp sting of the rejection. He stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring up at the sleek modern facade of the building, the glass windows reflecting his own frustrated face. He had worked so hard to get here. To stand in front of the very gallery that housed the most prestigious names in contemporary art. And yet, in the blink of an eye, it felt like his dreams had been trampled under the polished boots of a man who couldn't see past his own arrogance. But despite the gnawing ache in his chest, Marcus refused to let the words of Charles Westbrook take root. He had never been one to back down, not from life and certainly not from his art. The gallery owner's dismissive attitude only solidified one thing in his mind: the world wasn't ready for what he had to offer. But that wasn't his problem. He would make the world see. He would prove that raw emotion, passion, and authenticity were just as valuable as technique and sophistication. He wiped his brow, which had begun to perspire despite the chilly air, and pulled out his phone. He glanced at his social media accounts, where he had been steadily building a following. The response from his small but loyal fan base had been positive. People resonated with his work. He wasn't alone in his vision. His art spoke to them, in ways that made them feel something visceral, something real. As he walked home that evening, a determination began to grow within him. Charles Westbrook might have dismissed his work, but Marcus knew he had something others would appreciate. He just needed to reach them. If Vanguard Gallery wouldn't give him a platform, then he would build his own. The thought gave him a new sense of clarity. The road ahead might not be easy, but he wasn't afraid of the challenge. Over the next few months, Marcus threw himself into his art even more. He rented a small studio in the heart of a bustling neighborhood, one that was far removed from the polished streets where galleries like Vanguard flourished. This was a space that reflected the raw energy he poured into his paintings, dimly lit and a little worn, but full of life. He painted every day, sometimes for hours at a stretch, his brush strokes becoming more confident with each canvas. The energy in his work was palpable, and he could feel it growing with every new piece. The subjects of his paintings ranged from urban street scenes to abstract depictions of human emotion, anger, joy, confusion, and hope, all intertwined in a chaotic, beautiful dance of color. Each piece told a story, some personal, others more universal. The world, Marcus believed, needed to see his story. He needed to show them how the struggles of his life, his background, his identity as a Black artist, could speak to everyone. As his work began to evolve, so did his presence in the art world. Marcus started sharing more on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. He posted photos of his studio, his process, snippets of his paintings. His followers grew, slowly at first, then exponentially as the art world began to take notice of this up-and-coming artist. His raw style, bold and unapologetic, seemed to resonate with people who longed for something different, something that didn't fit the mold of traditional art. He wasn't just painting for the elite or for the critics, he was painting for the people. One day, while Marcus was posting a new piece, a portrait of a young man standing strong against a backdrop of swirling, turbulent colors, he received a direct message from an art collector named Vanessa Lynn. She was a well-known figure in the art world, someone whose influence had turned many obscure artists into household names. She had stumbled upon Marcus's work through a friend, and after seeing his recent pieces, she was intrigued. "I've never seen anything quite like your work," Vanessa wrote. "There's an intensity to it, a power. I think you could do something incredible in the art world." Marcus's heart skipped a beat as he read her message. He immediately responded, grateful but cautious, not yet fully believing what he was reading. "I appreciate you reaching out. I've been working hard to get my art out there. It means a lot that you see something in it." Vanessa's response came quickly, "Let's talk. I think you're sitting on something huge. I want to help you take it to the next level." It wasn't long before they arranged a meeting. Vanessa explained that she had connections to some of the most influential galleries and collectors around the world. She saw in Marcus's work the potential for something that could resonate far beyond the confines of the traditional art world. She understood the power of art that was untamed, that had a message, a story to tell. She offered him a chance to exhibit his work in an exclusive showcase that would draw attention from high-end collectors. "Your art is not just visually striking," Vanessa told him during their first meeting, "it's a statement. People will pay top dollar for that kind of authenticity. It's raw and honest, and that's exactly what the world needs right now." Marcus's pulse quickened. The validation, the recognition, it felt like everything he had worked for was about to come true. For the first time since his rejection at Vanguard Gallery, he felt a sense of peace. He wasn't waiting for approval anymore. He was creating his own opportunity. As the weeks went by, the show came together. The buzz around Marcus's work grew, and so did the demand. Soon, the first major pieces he sold fetched tens of thousands of dollars. He was invited to participate in auctions, his art now sought after by collectors, critics, and fans alike. His name was no longer just a whisper among independent artists, it was becoming a force to be reckoned with. But it wasn't just the financial success that filled Marcus with pride. It was the sense that he was doing something important, something that spoke to people from all walks of life. He was telling his story, his truth, and it was resonating. He was no longer the struggling artist dismissed by the likes of Charles Westbrook. He was someone the art world had no choice but to reckon with. And with every painting he sold, every show he held, Marcus felt himself getting closer to something he hadn't even known he desired, the ability to create the kind of space where artists like him, who defied expectations and shattered stereotypes, could thrive. Charles Westbrook had been wrong. It wasn't about the refinement, the polished technique, or the elite circles that determined the value of art. It was about truth. It was about the raw, unfiltered expression of the human experience. And Marcus Jenkins was ready to show the world just how valuable that could be. Marcus sat at his small studio desk, surrounded by a sea of unfinished canvases, scattered paint tubes, and brushes of all sizes. His phone buzzed on the edge of the table, a reminder that his life was rapidly changing. Just months ago, he had been struggling to keep the lights on, his paintings barely noticed, dismissed by the very gallery that had turned him away. Now, his inbox was flooded with messages, some from collectors, others from critics, and even a few from prominent figures in the art world. The turning point had come quickly. It wasn't just the viral posts on social media. It wasn't just the handful of pieces that had sold at gallery exhibitions or the online auctions. It was the moment when Vanessa Lynn, the seasoned art collector who had recognized his raw talent, introduced him to a wider audience. She'd brokered deals with collectors who appreciated the energy and authenticity of his work, bringing his paintings to the attention of those who saw the value in his art, both financially and emotionally. One morning, after weeks of anticipation, Marcus received an email that would change everything. It came from an auction house in New York, one of the most respected in the world, known for hosting high-profile art auctions that brought millions of dollars. The subject line read, "Exclusive invitation, feature your work in our upcoming auction." Marcus's breath caught in his throat as he opened the email. The message was brief but to the point, "We are excited to invite you to feature your work in our upcoming auction. Based on the success of your recent exhibitions, we believe your paintings are poised to command significant interest from top-tier collectors. We are confident that this will be a pivotal moment in your career. The email continued with details of the auction, including the date, venue, and instructions on submitting the pieces they wanted to feature. His heart raced as he read it over and over again. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The next few days passed in a blur as Marcus prepared for the auction. He selected his most striking pieces, the ones that captured the raw emotion he had worked so tirelessly to convey. One piece, in particular, stood out: Strength in the Struggle, a painting that depicted a young man standing in the center of a chaotic swirl of colors, his posture defiant and unyielding, a symbol of resilience. It was his most personal piece, one that encapsulated his own journey from rejection to success, and he knew it was the one that would resonate with collectors. Marcus's studio had transformed. The walls were now adorned with the works he had created over the past months, each one telling a different story, but all connected by a common theme of struggle and triumph. His paintings were no longer just about the moment of creation, they were about overcoming adversity, about pushing past the limits that others had set for him, and about claiming space in a world that had once turned its back on him. On the day of the auction, Marcus stood in the back of the lavish venue, watching as guests filtered in, dressed in their finest. The room was filled with the hum of conversation, the clink of champagne glasses, and the polished elegance of some of the wealthiest art collectors in the world. He was surrounded by figures whose names he had once only seen in magazines, people whose opinions had shaped the art world for decades. He had never felt more out of place, and yet, there was something exhilarating about the whole experience. This was his moment, and he was determined to savor it. As he moved through the crowd, he overheard snippets of conversation about his work. "Did you see the latest Jenkins piece? It's unlike anything I've seen in years. I hear Strength in the Struggle is going to fetch a record price tonight. It's already making waves in the art world." People were talking about him. The raw energy he had poured into his art had found its audience, and now it was about to pay off. As the auction began, Marcus stood in the back, his heart thumping in his chest as the bidding started. One by one, his paintings were brought up for auction, each one selling for more than he had ever dreamed. His work was in high demand, and the prices climbed higher with each bid. Finally, it was time for Strength in the Struggle to be showcased. The moment the piece was revealed, there was a collective gasp from the crowd. It wasn't just the vibrancy of the colors or the rawness of the subject, it was the emotion that poured from the canvas. The room seemed to fall silent as the auctioneer began the bidding. $1 million, the auctioneer called out, a smile curling on his lips. Marcus's breath hitched. $1 million? The room was watching in anticipation as the bids continued to rise. With each increase, Marcus could feel the weight of the moment settle in. This wasn't just about the money, it was about validation. It was about proving to himself and to the world that he was right. His art had value, not because it was polished or refined, but because it was real. It spoke to the heart. $2 million, the auctioneer called out, his voice cutting through the air. The bids continued to escalate until, finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the hammer came down. Sold. For $5 million. The crowd erupted into applause, and Marcus felt his knees weaken. He could hardly believe what had just happened. The painting he had poured his soul into had just sold for $5 million. It was the validation he had been waiting for. He wasn't just an artist struggling to be seen anymore, he was a force to be reckoned with. As the evening wore on, Marcus stood in stunned silence as the final pieces of his collection were auctioned off. Each one sold for astronomical prices, far exceeding his expectations. By the end of the night, he had made more money than he could have ever dreamed of, and the art world had taken notice. His work was no longer a side project or a passion, it was now a commodity. His name was on the lips of the most influential figures in the industry. Vanessa Lynn, who had supported him from the beginning, approached him as the final bid was made. Her eyes sparkled with pride as she congratulated him. "You did it, Marcus. You've officially arrived. For the first time, Marcus allowed himself to fully absorb the magnitude of what had just happened. He had made it. He had gone from being dismissed as a nobody to being one of the most sought-after artists in the world. But even as the cheers and congratulations surrounded him, a small part of him couldn't help but remember the man who had dismissed him, Charles Westbrook. The gallery owner who had called his work raw and untamed, who had told him that no one would ever pay $1 million for his art. Well, Marcus thought, as he looked out at the crowd of people congratulating him, Charles had been wrong. The art world had just spoken, and they had spoken loudly. And he was only getting started. The weeks following the auction were a blur of press conferences, gallery showings, and meetings with high-profile collectors. Marcus found himself thrust into a new world, one where money and prestige flowed as easily as the paint on his canvases. The validation he had craved for so long was now a constant, and he was fully immersed in the whirlwind of success. Yet, despite all the accolades and adulation, something still gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the image of Charles Westbrook's dismissive smile. The words, the rejection, the feeling of being looked down upon, they were still there, buried just beneath the surface of his newfound success. He had proven his worth, sure. His paintings were now fetching millions, and he had secured a place among the art world's elite. But the memory of Vanguard Gallery, where he had been mocked and belittled, was something he couldn't forget. Marcus wasn't a vengeful person by nature, but the more he thought about it, the more it irked him. He had done what many said couldn't be done. He had taken his raw, untamed art and turned it into something valuable. And yet, Charles Westbrook had been wrong. And that, to Marcus, was a victory that deserved acknowledgement. As he sat in his studio one evening, scrolling through his social media accounts, a thought came to him. He could take the next step, he could establish his own gallery, a place where artists like him, who didn't fit the traditional mold, could find a platform. But he also realized he could take something else, something personal, back to Vanguard Gallery. The idea began to form as a small, rebellious thought, but with each passing day, it grew stronger. Marcus had worked hard to get to where he was. It was time to remind people, especially those like Charles Westbrook, that you could not dismiss someone just because they didn't fit into the elite box they had created for art. So, he picked up his phone and made a call to Vanessa Lynn. After discussing his vision, she was more than willing to help him. They came up with a plan. Marcus would showcase his art at Vanguard Gallery, the same gallery that had turned him away, and he would do so on his terms. The exhibition would feature a new collection, one that was bold, daring, and reflective of his journey. A collection that would show the world how far he had come since that painful rejection. "I think it's time," Marcus told Vanessa over the phone. "It's time to remind them who I am." Vanessa, ever supportive, agreed. "It'll be the perfect way to close this chapter and open a new one. Let's make this about more than just art. Let's make it about the story of someone who refused to be dismissed." And so, the planning began. Marcus, with the help of Vanessa, began putting together a collection for the show. He worked tirelessly, pouring his heart into every brushstroke. He painted with more intensity than ever, channeling all his frustrations, his triumphs, and his growth into the pieces. Each painting in the collection was a reflection of his journey, from that first rejection to his rise as a celebrated artist. The exhibition, titled Reclaimed, The Rise of the Unseen, would be a bold statement. It was about redemption, resilience, and reclaiming a space in an art world that had almost cast him aside. But the most important part of the show was its location, Vanguard Gallery. As the exhibition date drew closer, Marcus began to feel the weight of his decision. He knew that walking into Vanguard Gallery as a successful artist would be a powerfully symbolic act. It wasn't just about showcasing his art, it was about confronting the place that had once rejected him, and doing so with a sense of triumph. The night before the opening, Marcus stood in front of the mirror in his apartment. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, the kind he would have never dreamed of wearing a few months ago. He adjusted his tie and took a deep breath. This wasn't just an art show, it was his statement. His refusal to let anyone define his worth. The next evening, Vanguard Gallery buzzed with energy. The opening event was packed with art collectors, critics, and prominent figures from the art world. But tonight, the crowd wasn't there to see the polished, sophisticated work of elite artists. They were there to see Marcus Jenkins, the artist who had defied expectations, the artist who had taken his work from the margins and thrust it into the spotlight. As Marcus walked into the gallery, he felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of him still felt like the young man who had been rejected at this very place, but another part of him knew that he had transcended that. The man who stood before the crowds tonight was not the same person who had walked in here months ago. He was stronger, more confident, and more certain of his place in the world. The gallery was filled with whispers as people began to realize what was happening. They had heard about Marcus's rise, but seeing his work up close, feeling the energy of the paintings, it was a different experience entirely. People were drawn to his pieces, mesmerized by their raw power and emotional depth. Charles Westbrook, as expected, was there too. He had heard about Marcus's success and was curious to see what all the fuss was about. When he saw Marcus enter the gallery, he froze for a moment, his face betraying a mixture of surprise and disbelief. He had never imagined this moment would come, certainly not in this way. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the room, and Marcus could see the recognition in Charles's eyes. It was the look of a man who realized he had made a huge mistake. But Marcus wasn't there to gloat. The days following the exhibition at Vanguard Gallery felt surreal for Marcus. The overwhelming success of Reclaimed, the rise of the unseen had solidified his place in the art world, but it also felt like something deeper had shifted. For the first time, he wasn't just the artist with raw talent, he was the embodiment of persistence, proof that resilience could take you farther than anyone had ever imagined. As his work continued to sell at astronomical prices, the headlines followed. News outlets, both within the art world and beyond, began to focus on his meteoric rise. Stories of how Marcus had been dismissed, turned away, and then rejected by some of the biggest names in art became part of his narrative. But it wasn't just his success that captivated people, it was the idea that someone could rise from the depths of rejection and redefine what success meant. Marcus was the symbol of every artist who had ever been told they weren't good enough, every underdog who had been overlooked. He had become an icon. Yet, with all the attention came a new set of challenges. He was no longer just creating art for himself, he was creating for the world. Every new piece carried with it the expectation of something even bigger, more impactful. The pressure to maintain his momentum, to prove that his success wasn't just a fluke, weighed on him more heavily than he had anticipated. The gallery shows, the interviews, the endless stream of requests for his time, sometimes, it felt suffocating. Marcus had never wanted to be a celebrity. He had wanted to be an artist, to paint and share his story with those who would listen. But now, his story was being told by the media, by critics, by collectors. It wasn't just about the art anymore. It was about the story of a young black artist who had faced adversity and was now in the position to change the game. One evening, after a particularly grueling press tour, Marcus found himself in his studio, staring blankly at a new canvas. He had tried to work, but the creative spark had gone out. He was exhausted, and the weight of the expectations was starting to eat away at his passion. His fingers hovered above the brush, but the movement felt mechanical. It wasn't the same feeling as before. The raw emotion, the fire that had propelled him to this point, had begun to fade. He let out a long sigh and set the brush down. It wasn't that he had lost his ability to create, it was that the world had put him in a box. He was no longer just Marcus, the artist with a story to tell. He had become Marcus Jenkins, the successful black artist, and somehow, the focus had shifted away from his message, to his persona. The labels were getting in the way of his creative process. Marcus needed a break. He needed to reconnect with the very thing that had started all of this, the love of creating, the sheer joy of bringing something from his mind to the canvas without the fear of expectations looming over him. He picked up his phone and sent a text to Vanessa, "I need a reset. I'm going to take a week off. A break from the press, from everything." I just need to paint again, for me. No pressure. Vanessa responded almost immediately, take all the time you need, Marcus. You've earned it. We'll keep everything running smoothly while you recharge. Marcus smiled at her message. He knew he had people who cared about him, who wanted to see him thrive. But this was his journey, and it was time to reclaim that space for himself. The next morning, he packed a small bag and left his apartment. He needed to get away from the hustle, away from the constant noise that had been infiltrating his thoughts. He rented a small cabin by the lake, nestled in the quiet wilderness, far from the spotlight and distractions. It was the perfect place to reconnect with himself. For the first few days, Marcus did nothing but walk along the shore, breathe in the fresh air, and let his mind wander. The world felt a million miles away from the demands of the art world. There, in the peace of nature, Marcus began to remember why he had started painting in the first place. It wasn't for the fame, the money, or the recognition, it was to express what was inside him, to share his emotions and thoughts with the world in a way that could touch others. On the fourth day, he finally sat down with a canvas in front of him. He began to paint with no plan, no expectation, just the desire to let his feelings flow. The colors on the canvas came alive, the brush strokes felt freer, more alive than they had in months. As he painted, his mind cleared. The pressures of the art world faded into the background, and the pure joy of creation took over. He was doing it for himself again, just as he had before the world had taken notice. By the end of the week, Marcus had completed several pieces. Each one felt like a release, a return to the rawness that had first ignited his artistic journey. They were different from anything he had painted before, more introspective, more personal, but just as powerful. When he returned to the city, he felt reinvigorated. His time away had given him the clarity he needed to push forward in his work. It wasn't about maintaining his position in the art world anymore, it was about staying true to his vision. The pressure to conform, to meet expectations, had melted away. He was back to being just Marcus Jenkins, the artist who painted what he felt. Vanessa was thrilled to see his new collection. She could sense the shift in his work, the return to authenticity. These pieces, she said as she looked over his latest work, they're powerful. Raw. Real. This is where you're supposed to be. With the new collection ready, Marcus decided it was time to shake things up once again. He didn't want to rely solely on high-end galleries or auction houses. This time, he was going to do something completely different. He would showcase his new works in a space that had never been associated with art, a community center in the heart of an underserved neighborhood. He wanted to connect directly with people, to remind them that art wasn't just for the elite, it was for everyone. The new show was titled Rebirth, The Art of the People, and it was held in a modest, yet vibrant space in the community. The exhibition was a massive success. People from all walks of life came to see his work, and the response was overwhelming. Many of them had never set foot in a gallery before, but Marcus's art resonated with them. It wasn't just the paintings that drew them in, it was the message, the connection he had forged with them. This wasn't just about art, it was about making a statement. Marcus had become more than an artist, he had become a voice for the voiceless, a reminder that anyone could create, anyone could rise. And this time, he was doing it his way, on his terms. The success of Rebirth, The Art of the People reverberated far beyond the walls of the community center. For weeks, Marcus's name was on the lips of art critics, journalists, and even politicians. The exhibition had not only showcased his talent but also shed light on a larger, more significant message: art was for everyone, not just the privileged few. But with all the accolades came an unexpected shift in the dynamic between Marcus and the art world. The collectors, who had once been captivated by his raw emotional expression, now saw him as a symbol. They saw him as a cultural icon, someone whose work transcended mere aesthetics and became a statement about identity, class, and race. The moment they saw the power of his message, they wanted more. And, as always, where there was a demand for art, there was a price tag attached. Marcus had to navigate the delicate balance between staying true to his artistic vision and satisfying the ever-growing demands of those who now sought to own a piece of his story. He was no longer the struggling artist who could barely pay rent. He was a business, a brand. And while he was grateful for the financial success, a part of him began to feel uneasy with the commodification of his work. It wasn't just the buyers who were causing this discomfort, it was the way the media, and even some of his closest colleagues, had begun to treat him. The more successful he became, the more they saw him as a tool, a product to be marketed and sold. They didn't care about his process, his struggles, or the raw emotion that had initially fueled his creations. They cared about the name, Marcus Jenkins, the artist whose pieces sold for millions. His work was no longer seen as an expression of his soul, it was an asset to be exploited. Vanessa had seen the change in Marcus. She had been there since the beginning, guiding him through his early struggles and now managing his rise to prominence. She could see the weight of the art world pressing on him, and she worried about what it might cost him in the long run. One afternoon, as they were reviewing his upcoming schedule, Vanessa voiced her concerns. "Marcus, I think we need to slow down a bit," she said gently, glancing up from the stack of invitations to more gallery shows and media interviews. "You've been going nonstop for months. I know you're pushing hard to establish your legacy, but I don't want to see you burn out." Marcus sighed and leaned back in his chair. He hadn't realized how much he had been working until it was pointed out to him. The constant cycle of exhibitions, press events, and commissions had become a blur. He had been living for the next big moment, the next deal, and he had forgotten why he started painting in the first place. "I feel like I have to keep going," he admitted. "There's so much momentum now, so many people counting on me. If I stop, I'll lose everything I've worked for." Vanessa shook her head. "It's not about stopping, Marcus. It's about pacing yourself. You don't need to keep saying yes to every opportunity. You have control over your path. Just because they're offering doesn't mean you have to take it." Marcus knew she was right. The world had seen his potential, and now everyone wanted a piece of it. But in the midst of all this success, he had lost sight of the personal satisfaction he once felt when he picked up a brush. It was time to remember why he had started painting, before the fame, before the fortune, and certainly before the pressure. Over the next few weeks, Marcus made some significant changes to his schedule. He cut back on interviews and gallery appearances, and began focusing more on his creative process. He also reached out to a few close friends in the art world, people who knew him before all of this happened, to remind himself of the roots that had grounded him in the first place. As he started to paint again for himself, the pressure to succeed faded, and a new sense of clarity emerged. He began to create not for the critics or the collectors, but for the joy of expressing his inner world. He started a new collection titled Echoes of the Soul, a deeply introspective body of work that explored the themes of self-reflection, memory, and the passage of time. It was a departure from the high-octane energy of his previous pieces, but it felt right. It was personal, meaningful, and most importantly, it was for him. When the collection was finally ready for unveiling, Marcus decided to showcase it in a way that would honor his journey without compromising his vision. Instead of holding another high-profile exhibition in a prestigious gallery, he organized an intimate showing in the same community center where Rebirth, the art of the people, had been held. This time, the focus was not on the art world's elite but on the people who had supported him from the start, the people who truly understood his work. The exhibition opened with a quiet, reflective tone. Marcus welcomed guests with a speech that spoke to the themes of the collection, acknowledging how far he had come but also recognizing how important it was to stay grounded. His words resonated deeply with those in the room. It was a reminder that success wasn't just about wealth and status, it was about staying true to one's roots, to the very essence of who you were as an artist and a person. As the evening unfolded, it became clear that this show was different. There were no glitzy media coverage or celebrity attendees. The focus was on the work, on the emotion captured within each brushstroke. The visitors, many of whom were regular people, felt a deep connection to Marcus's pieces. There were no auctions or sales pitches, just a shared moment of reflection and understanding. The prices didn't matter, the art did. That night, as Marcus stood before his paintings, surrounded by the people who truly appreciated his work, he felt something he hadn't felt in months: peace. He had rediscovered the joy of creating, free from the pressure of the art world's demands. In the weeks that followed, the exhibition was widely regarded as one of the most profound moments in his career, not because of the sales, but because of the connection it fostered. The media had focused on his rise to fame, but now they were talking about the art again, about the heart, soul, and authenticity that had brought him to where he was. Marcus's career continued to flourish, but this time, he moved forward with a new sense of purpose. He knew that true success wasn't about the price tag attached to his paintings, it was about the stories they told, the emotions they evoked, and the people they connected with. And that, he realized, was worth more than any amount of money. As the years passed, Marcus Jenkins became more than just an artist. He became a symbol of perseverance, authenticity, and the power of artistic expression to change the world. The art world, which had once dismissed him, now heralded him as a trailblazer, someone who had not only redefined what it meant to be a successful artist, but who had also created a platform for others to follow. But Marcus knew that his legacy wasn't just going to be defined by his paintings. It was going to be defined by the doors he had opened for others, the ways in which he had broken barriers and redefined expectations, not only for Black artists but for all artists who felt they didn't fit into the traditional mold of the art world. After his exhibition Echoes of the Soul, Marcus began to focus on giving back to the community that had once supported him. He started working with underrepresented youth, particularly in urban areas, teaching them the power of self-expression through art. He set up workshops, mentorship programs, and exhibitions, providing young artists with the resources and opportunities that had been denied to him at the start of his career. Through these efforts, Marcus began to form his own foundation, aptly named the Jenkins Foundation for Artistic Expression. The foundation's mission was simple: to empower underrepresented artists, to give them the tools and opportunities they needed to succeed in the art world, and to help them understand the importance of maintaining their authenticity, regardless of the pressure to conform. Marcus knew that art was not just a means of personal expression, it was also a form of social change, a way to amplify voices that had been silenced for too long. In addition to his work with the foundation, Marcus also became an advocate for diversity and inclusion in the art world. He regularly spoke at conferences, panels, and forums, using his platform to call for more inclusive practices in galleries, museums, and auction houses. He fought to ensure that the art world would no longer be dominated by a small, privileged group of collectors and curators. He wanted it to be a space where all voices could be heard, where all artists, regardless of race, gender, or socioeconomic status, could thrive. His efforts didn't go unnoticed. Major art institutions began to take his words seriously. Slowly, but surely, they started implementing changes. Museums began to expand their collections to include more works by artists of color. Galleries began to showcase more diverse artists, offering them the same opportunities that had once been reserved for the elite. Even auction houses, which had once been reluctant to accept the work of non-established artists, began to take note of the rising demand for art that challenged the status quo. One of the most significant changes came in the form of a new art exhibition organized by the Jenkins Foundation. The foundation had teamed up with several prominent art institutions to create a traveling exhibition that would showcase the work of emerging artists from underrepresented communities. The exhibition, titled The New Vanguard, traveled across the country, bringing art to areas that had never seen it before, and showing the world the raw, untapped talent that existed beyond the traditional art scene. As the exhibition made its way to different cities, it garnered significant attention. Critics praised the diversity and depth of the work, and the public responded enthusiastically. For many of the artists involved, it was their first opportunity to be seen by a larger audience. And for many of them, the exhibition marked the beginning of their own journeys to success. It wasn't just the artists who benefited from the exhibition, the public was also exposed to a new world of art. People from all walks of life found themselves inspired by the pieces on display, connecting with the stories they told and the emotions they evoked. For many, it was a wake-up call, a reminder that art wasn't just about the established rules and conventions. It was about expression, authenticity, and truth. The exhibition shattered the notion that art had to be elite, that it had to fit within a certain framework. It showed that art could be a reflection of society, a reflection of the diverse voices and experiences that shaped the world. Despite his immense success, Marcus remained grounded. He never lost sight of the values that had driven him from the very beginning. He continued to live by the principles of authenticity, humility, and service. He was never interested in the limelight for the sake of fame. His focus remained on creating meaningful work and uplifting others. As the years went on, Marcus's impact on the art world grew, but he never let it change who he was. He continued to paint, continuing to produce powerful works that reflected his personal journey, his reflections on society, and his deep understanding of the human experience. But perhaps the most important legacy he left behind was the one that would live on long after his paintings had faded from view, the legacy of an artist who had fought for a more inclusive, diverse, and authentic art world. In his final public appearance at an art gala, Marcus was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award for his contributions to both the art world and the community. As he stood on stage, accepting the award, he couldn't help but reflect on the long road that had brought him here. The struggle, the rejection, the triumphs, it had all led to this moment. But rather than speaking about his own accomplishments, Marcus used his acceptance speech to thank the people who had supported him along the way, his mentors, his community, and the countless artists who had inspired him. He spoke about the importance of leaving a legacy, not in the form of accolades or awards, but in the form of change. "My legacy," Marcus said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "is not in the paintings I leave behind. It's in the artists I've helped discover their own voice. It's in the spaces I've created for others to thrive. It's in the fight to ensure that every artist has a seat at the table, that their work is valued, and their voice is heard." The applause was deafening, but Marcus knew that the real work had just begun. His legacy was not just his art, it was the movement he had sparked, the change he had helped bring about. And in that moment, he knew that the true power of art wasn't just in what it could do for the artist, but in what it could do for the world.